Today is the 3rd of August on the Khandha Samyutta, chapter 22 of the Samyutta Nikaya. Now we come to Sutta 22.3. On one occasion, the Venerable Mahathera was dwelling among the people of Avanti on Mount Apata at Kuraragara, and the householder Alidakani approached the Venerable Mahathera, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, "Venerable Sir, this was said by the Blessed One in the questions of Magandhya in the Ataka Vaga." Stop here for a moment. This Ataka Vaga is found in the Sutta Nipata. And Sutta Nipata is one of the books in the Khuddaka Nikaya. The Sutta Nipata is supposed to be one of the very old, earliest books, supposed to be very reliable. In that book, the Buddha said, "Having left home to roam without abode, in the village the sage is intimate with none, rid of sensual pleasures, without expectations. He will not engage people in dispute." How, Venerable Sir, should the meaning of this stated by the Blessed One in brief be understood in detail? Stop here for a moment. This Venerable Mahathera is supposed to be very good in explaining the suttas. And this verses by the Buddha, having left home to roam without an abode, without a dwelling, in the village the sage is intimate with none, rid of sensual pleasures, without expectations, who would not engage people in dispute. Then the Venerable Mahathera explained, the form element householder is the home of consciousness. One whose consciousness is shackled by lust for the form element is called one who roams about in a home. The feeling element is the home of consciousness. The perception element, the volition element, is the home of consciousness. One whose consciousness is shackled by lust for these aggregates is called one who roams about in a home. It is in such a way that one roams about in a home. And how, householder, does one roam about homeless? The desire, lust, delight and craving, the engagement and clinging, the mental standpoints, adherences and underlying tendencies regarding the form element, these have been abandoned by the Tathagata, the Buddha, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. Therefore the Tathagata is called one who roams about homeless. The desire, lust, delight and craving, the engagement and clinging, the mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding the feeling element, perception element, volition element, consciousness element, these have been abandoned by the Tathagata, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. Therefore the Tathagata is called one who roams about homeless. This in such a way that one roams about homeless. Let's stop here for a moment. In the verses, the Buddha said, having left home to roam without abode, without a dwelling. Here, Venerable Mahathera is explaining that roam without an abode, without a dwelling. If you are in a dwelling, you are imprisoned in that dwelling. So here, if a person roams about in a home, Venerable Mahathera says that he is imprisoned by lust for form, feeling, perception, volition, and even consciousness. And one who roams about homeless has cut off the desire and lust for the form or body, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. So his explanation is that home and homeless is not the physical home, but the mentally being imprisoned. Now to continue. And how, householder, does one roam about in an abode, or just now I was talking about home. By diffusion and confinement in the abode consisting in the sign of forms, one is called one who roams about in an abode. By diffusion and confinement in the abode consisting in the sign of sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena, one is called one who roams about in an abode. And how, householder, does one roam about without abode? Diffusion and confinement in the abode consisting in the sign of forms, these have been abandoned by the Tathagata, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. Therefore, the Tathagata is called one who roams about without abode. Diffusion and confinement in the abode consisting in the sign of sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena, these have been abandoned by the Tathagata, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. Therefore, the Tathagata is called one who roams about without abode. It is in such a way that one roams about without abode. So here he's explaining that if the mind is diffused and confined in the abode, is a dwelling in the sign of forms, the sign of sounds, odors, etc., the six senses. So if our attention is always going out through these six senses, then our mind becomes diffused and confined. Roaming without an abode is not being diffused and confined in the mind because of these six senses. And how, householder, is one intimate in the village? Here, householder, someone lives in association with lay people. He rejoices with them and sorrows with them. He is happy when they are happy and sad when they are sad. And he involves himself in their affairs and duties. It is in such a way that one is intimate in the village. And how, householder, is one intimate with none in the village? Here, householder, a monk does not live in association with lay people. He does not rejoice with them or sorrow with them. He is not happy when they are happy and sad when they are sad. And he does not involve himself in their affairs and duties. It is in such a way that one is intimate with none in the village. We'll stop here for a moment. Here, a monk is said to be intimate in the village if he associates too much with lay people. And how, householder, is one not rid of sensual pleasures? Here, householder, someone is not devoid of lust, desire, affection, thirst, passion, and craving in regard to sensual pleasures. It is in such a way that one is not rid of sensual pleasures. And how, householder, is one rid of sensual pleasures? Here, householder, someone is devoid of lust, desire, affection, thirst, passion, and craving in regard to sensual pleasures. It is in such a way that one is rid of sensual pleasures. This one you can understand. And how, householder, does one entertain expectations? Here, householder, someone thinks, may I have such form or body in the future. May I have such feeling in the future. May I have such perception in the future, volition, consciousness in the future. It is in such a way that one entertains expectations. And how, householder, is one without expectations? Here, householder, someone does not think, may I have such a body in the future, such a feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness in the future. It is in such a way that one is without expectations. And how, householder, does one engage people in dispute? Here, householder, someone engages in such talk as this. You don't understand this Dhamma Vinaya. I understand Dhamma Vinaya. What? You understand this Dhamma Vinaya? You are practicing wrongly and practicing rightly. What should have been said before, you said after. What should have been said after, you said before. I am consistent, you are inconsistent. What you took so long to think out has been overturned. Your thesis has been refuted. Go off to rescue your thesis, or you are defeated. Or disentangle yourself if you can. It is in such a way that one engages people in dispute. And how, householder, does one not engage people in dispute? Here, householder, someone does not engage in such talk as this. You don't understand this Dhamma Vinaya, etc. This in such a way that one does not engage people in dispute. Thus, householder, when it was said by the Blessed One in the questions of Magandhya in the Atthakavagga, having left home to roam without abode, in the village the sage is intimate with none, rid of sensual pleasures, without expectations, he would not engage people in dispute. It is in such a way that the meaning of this, stated in brief by the Blessed One, should be understood in detail. So you see, 4 lines of Venerable Mahathera can explain in such long length and detail. 22.5. At Savatthi, there the Blessed One said, monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? The origin and passing away of form, the origin and passing away of feeling, the origin and passing away of perception, volition, consciousness. Stop here for a moment. So here, Buddha says that we should develop concentration so that we can understand things as they really are. And what is it important for us to understand? Here the Buddha says the 5 aggregates, how the 5 aggregates originate and pass away. And what, monks, is the origin of body, of form? What is the origin of feeling, perception, volition and consciousness? Here, monks, one seeks delight, one welcomes, one remains holding. And what is it that one seeks delight in? What does one welcome? To what does one remain holding? One seeks delight in form or body, welcomes it and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, delight arises. Delight in form is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, being comes to be. With existence with being as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Similarly, one seeks delight in feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, welcomes it and remains holding to it. As a consequence, delight arises, etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. This, monks, is the origin of form, the origin of feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. Stop here for a moment. So here, the Buddha says the origin of body, feeling, perception and volition, consciousness, that means the origin of body and mind, is that one is attached to the 5 aggregates. When one is attached to the 5 aggregates, being arises. If you remember, the other day we read the 12 links of dependent origination. Upadana is attachment or clinging. Upadana is the condition for bhava to arise. And bhava is this being, this perception that I am or I exist. So, with being as condition, then jati, birth or rebirth, takes place. With jati as condition, then you have jara, marana, aging and death, and all the different types of suffering is the origin of suffering. So, similarly, one is attached to feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. So, being attached to it, then this attachment, upadana, gives rise to bhava. Similarly, all that. So that is how the 5 aggregates arise. The 5 aggregates arise from attachment, and attachment brings about being and then rebirth. And what, monks, is the passing away of body? What is the passing away of feeling, perception, volition and consciousness? Here, monks, one does not seek delight, one does not welcome, one does not remain holding. And what is it that one does not seek delight in? What doesn't one welcome? To what doesn't one remain holding? One does not seek delight in body, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. As a consequence of this, delight in body ceases. With the cessation of delight comes cessation of clinging. with the cessation of clinging, cessation of being, etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Similarly, one does not seek delight in feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. One does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. As a consequence of this, delight in the aggregate ceases, such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. This, monks, is the passing away of body, it is the passing away of feeling, perception, volition, consciousness. This last part, the Buddha says, how does the body, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness cease? They cease when we do not delight in the five aggregates. Delight can be represented by craving. So if you have no craving, then the next link in the chain of dependent origination, upadana, the clinging also stops. When clinging stops, then bhava, being stops. And being stops, then jati, rebirth stops. When jati, rebirth stops, then aging and dying and the whole mass of suffering ceases. This is how body and mind, the five aggregates, cease. So remember the first part, the Buddha says, if you want to understand the five aggregates, you have to develop concentration. Because when you develop concentration, samadhi, especially the Buddha says, the perfect samadhi is the four jhanas. If you have the four jhanas, then the mind becomes so clear and the mind becomes bright. Then only you can see things as they really are. Then you can understand the five aggregates. You understand the five aggregates, then suffering will cease. 22.6. At Savatthi, the Buddha said, monks, make an exertion in seclusion. A monk who is secluded understands things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? The origin and passing away of body, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness. And what, monks, is the origin of body, etc.? The rest of the sutta is exactly the same as the previous one. The only difference here is that instead of the Buddha asking us to develop concentration, here the Buddha is asking us to practice seclusion. And seclusion, as I mentioned before, there are two types of seclusion: body seclusion, kaya viveka, and mental seclusion, chitta viveka. Kaya viveka is being physically secluded from others. Either you live alone, or if you live with others in a monastery, and then you are aloof from them. You don't associate, don't talk too much with people. And then chitta viveka is mental seclusion. Your mind is secluded from the world of the six senses. You go into deep meditation, and that is a higher form of seclusion. So here the Buddha is also stressing seclusion. So two things are important, concentration and seclusion. 22.7 at Savatthi. Monks, I will teach you agitation through clinging and non-agitation through non-clinging. Listen to that and attend closely, I will speak. Yes, my good sir, those monks replied. The Blessed One said, and how, monks, is there agitation through clinging? Here, monks, the unlearned ordinary person who does not see Aryas, noble ones, is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma, who does not see superior persons and is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma, regards body as self as possessing body, or body as in the self, or self as in the body. That body of his changes and alters. With the change and alteration of body, his consciousness becomes preoccupied with the change of body. Agitation and a constellation of mental states born of preoccupation with the change of body remain obsessing his mind. Because his mind is obsessed, he is frightened, distressed and anxious, and through clinging he becomes agitated. Similarly, with feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, all these change, and then he becomes agitated, and all the different mental states arise out of his preoccupation with the change. So he becomes frightened, distressed, etc. It is in such a way, monks, that there is agitation through clinging. Stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha is saying that the ordinary, unlearned person, he attaches to body, feeling, perception, volition as self, or as belonging to self, or self is in the aggregates, or the aggregates are in the self. But then when the aggregates change, because it is their nature to change, then he becomes mentally occupied with this change. That means he becomes agitated and he thinks about it. When he thinks about it, the mind proliferates. All his worries multiply. Then he becomes more agitated. So he becomes frightened, distressed and all that. This is how there is agitation because of clinging. And how, monks, is there non-agitation through non-clinging? Here, monks, the learned noble disciple who sees noble ones and is skilled and trained in the Dhamma, who sees superior persons and is skilled and trained in the Dhamma, does not regard body as self, or self as possessing body, or body as in the self, or self as in that body. Then that body of his changes and alters. Despite the change and alteration of body, his consciousness does not become preoccupied with the change of form. I mean, he's not worried. He's not agitated. No agitation and constellation of mental states born of preoccupation with the change of body remain obsessing his mind. Because his mind is not obsessed, he is not frightened, distressed or anxious. And through non-clinging, he does not become agitated. Similarly, for feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. This in such a way, monks, that there is non-agitation through non-clinging. So in the second case, the person, the Aryan disciple who is learned in the Aryan Dhamma, who is trained in the Aryan Dhamma, he does not regard the five aggregates as the self, or as belonging to self, or the aggregates being in the self, or the self as being in the aggregates. So when the five aggregates change, because it is their nature to change, then he does not worry about it. Because he is not worried about it, he does not become agitated and obsessed with all these thoughts. Then he is not frightened, not distressed. That is how there is no agitation because of non-clinging. So it is the clinging that gives us suffering. If there is no clinging, there is no suffering. Now we come to 22.18. That's on page 870. At Savatthi, the Buddha said, monks, body is impermanent, body or form. The cause and condition for the arising of form or body is also impermanent. As body has originated from what is impermanent, how could it be permanent? Feeling is impermanent. Similarly, perception, volition, consciousness is impermanent. The cause and condition for the arising of the aggregates is also impermanent. As the aggregates have originated from what is impermanent, how could it be permanent? Seeing thus, he understands. Seeing thus, the learned, noble disciple experiences revulsion towards form or body, revulsion towards feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. Experiencing revulsion, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it's liberated. He understands, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. So here the Buddha is saying that the aggregates are impermanent, and the cause and condition for the arising of the aggregates is also impermanent. So because the aggregates have arisen from what is impermanent, how can we take it to be permanent? What does this mean? This means, for example, one day suppose you walk along the path, and then you see a beautiful flower. When you see a beautiful flower, because it's beautiful, you think you want to preserve it. But then this flower came about because of certain conditions, because of the plant was there, because of rainfall, because of sunlight, because of fertilizer and all that, the air and all that. Then the flower emerged one day. But because the flower is dependent on so many conditions, and those conditions that the flower is dependent on are also impermanent. So how can the flower itself be permanent? So for example, the flower depends on the plant itself, and the plant being a small plant, one day is going to die. So when the plant dies, how can the flower not die? So in the same way, for example, a shadow one day, when the sun rises in the morning, you see the shadow of a tree. That shadow was cast because of the sun being at an angle, was cast because of the tree being solid, and then you see that shadow. But the condition for that shadow, namely the sun and the tree, are impermanent. So very soon the sun is going to shift. When the sun shifts, then that shadow is not going to be there. So since the shadow is impermanent, and the condition for it to arise is also impermanent, so the shadow is even more impermanent than the condition for it to arise. Right? So in the same way, our body and our mind is dependent on so many conditions, and all these conditions are impermanent. So because all these conditions that support our body and mind is impermanent, then our body and mind is even more impermanent, since it's dependent on so many conditions. So that's how we should not want it to be permanent, because it can never be permanent. So without being permanent, we should not attach to it, because very soon it will disappear. 22.22 at Savatthi. There the Blessed One said, "Monks, I will teach you the burden, the carrier of the burden, the taking up of the burden, and the laying down of the burden. Listen to that. And what, monks, is the burden? It should be said, the 5 aggregates of clinging, of attachment." What 5? The 4 of body aggregate. Body aggregate, yes, is subject to clinging, or of attachment. The feeling aggregate of attachment. The perception, volition and consciousness aggregates of attachment. This is called the burden. Stop here for a moment. These aggregates are called Khandha. Khandha, 5 aggregates. And normally we refer to them as Pancha Upadana Khandha. Pancha Upadana Khandha. The 5 aggregates of attachment. 5 aggregates of attachment. 5 aggregates of attachment. These 3 words are 5 aggregates attachment. The most important is the word attachment. It is because of attachment that suffering arises. If there is no attachment to the aggregates, then there is no suffering. If we behave like the tree is not attached to its body, the tree is not attached to its leaf, to its fruit and all that, so the tree does not suffer. But we are attached to our head, to our nose, to our fingers, all the parts of us which are impermanent. The suffering comes about because of attachment. So these 5 aggregates are a burden. When you have the 5 aggregates, you are carrying a burden. We are carrying the burden of this body and the mind. So the burden is the 5 aggregates, the body and the mind. And what, monks, is the carrier of the burden? It should be said, the person, this Venerable One of such a name and clan. This is called the carrier of the burden. And stop here for the moment. The carrier of the burden is the person. Who is this person? This person is the fellow who thinks, I exist, I am this body, I am this mind. Once you have that I, then you think that you are a being in the world. So you think that you exist in the world. So when you think you exist, you have the notion that you exist because of the body and the mind. You take the body and the mind to be you. So the moment you think I exist, you carry the burden of this body and mind. And what monks is the taking up of the burden. It is this craving that leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. This is called the taking up of the burden. So, stop here for a moment. So, we take up the burden when we have craving. This craving is seeking delight here, seeking delight there. You see, most people in the world, they live their lives like that. Always trying to find enjoyment and happiness. Watching TV, playing with the computer, going touring overseas, trying to buy a big Porsche or Maserati sports car and all this. So always trying to find happiness here, happiness there. But unfortunately, that happiness cannot be satisfied. If you get all the things in the world, you're not contented. You still don't have happiness. That happiness is only momentary. It's not the deep happiness that most people want. So the taking up the burden is due to the craving. And what monks is the laying down of the burden. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving. The giving up, the relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. This is called the laying down of the burden. This is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Fortunate One, the teacher, further said, 5 aggregates are truly burdens. The burden carrier is the person. Taking up the burden is suffering in the world. Laying the burden down is blissful. Having laid the heavy burden down without taking up another burden, having drawn out craving with its root, one is free from hunger, fully quenched. This last part, the few verses, sometimes we chant at night. The one, Bara, Have, Pancha, Khandha and all that. So, because of craving, we take this body and the mind to be the self, so that we can enjoy life. We think this body and this mind gives us enjoyment. That's only when we decide, after a lot of suffering, we decide to put down this burden, put down this craving, then only we lay down the burden. 22.26 at Savatthi. Monks, before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened, it occurred to me, what is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape in the case of form or body? What is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape in the case of feeling, perception, volition and consciousness? Then monks, it occurred to me, the pleasure and joy that arise in dependence on form or body, that is the gratification in form or body. That body is impermanent, suffering and subject to change. This is the danger in body. The removal and abandonment of desire and lust for body, this is the escape from body. Similarly, the pleasure and joy that arise in dependence on feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, that is the gratification. That the aggregates are impermanent, suffering and subject to change. That is the danger in the aggregates. The removal and abandonment of desire and lust for the aggregates, this is the escape from the aggregates. So long, monks, as I did not directly know as they really are, the gratification, the danger and the escape in the case of these 5 aggregates, subject to clinging, I did not claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment in this world with its devas, maras and brahmas, in this generation with its ascetics and brahmins, its devas and humans. But when I directly knew all this as it really is, then I claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment in this world. The knowledge and vision arose in me. Unshakable is my liberation of mind. This is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. This sutta, there is a more detailed explanation of it, I think in the Majjhima Nikaya. So here the Buddha is saying, what is the gratification, like in the case of body? That means what is the satisfaction in the case of body? Then he says, the pleasure and joy that arise in dependence on the body, that is the gratification. So in the other more detailed sutta, it talks about the gratification of body is like because the body gives you pleasure. So they say that imagine a young girl, 15 or 16 years old, in the prime of life, looking at the most beautiful. That is the gratification of form. And what is the danger? The danger is that the same beautiful girl, after a few more years, she's 80 or 90 years old, and you see she's hunchback, all the hair turned white, maybe with a bald patch at the top, the hair also, the teeth also gone, skin wrinkled, and looking so ugly looking, that is the danger of form, the Buddha said. And then another example, the Buddha said, suppose this girl, even before she's old, maybe at the age of 40 years old, she got cancer. And then she's stricken on the bed, cannot help herself, seriously sick with cancer. She's lying on the bed, urinating on the bed, shitting on the bed. She got to be helped up to take her meal. You need people to wash her, clean her, and all that. So that time, she's still that beautiful young girl, no more. So that is again a danger. Or the Buddha said, after some time, she will die. And then if she's 3 or 4 days dead, the body will be bloated, blue-black, smelly, and all the liquids oozing out from the nose, from the ears, from the eyes, from the mouth, from the anus and all that. And she's still that beautiful 16-year-old girl, no more. So very soon, all of us, our body also like that. At one time when you're young, you look beautiful or handsome. As you grow older and older, it becomes more and more ugly. And one day you will become sick and you will die. So that is the danger. So the only escape is to remove the desire and lust for the body. Then only you will not suffer. So similarly for the other aggregates. 22.28 Asavati, the Buddha said, monks, if there were no gratification or satisfaction in body, beings would not become enamored with it. But because there is gratification in body, beings become enamored with it. If there were no danger in body, beings would not experience revulsion towards it. But because there is danger in body, beings experience revulsion towards it. If there were no escape from body, beings would not escape from it. But because there is an escape from body, beings escape from it. Similarly, monks, if there were no gratification in feelings, perception, volition, consciousness, beings would not become enamored with it. But because there is escape, beings escape from it. So long, monks, as beings have not directly known as they really are, the gratification as gratification, the danger as danger, the escape as escape. In the case of the 5 aggregates subject to clinging, they have not escaped from this world with its devas, Mara and Brahma, from this generation with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans. They have not become detached from it, released from it, nor do they dwell with a mind rid of barriers. For when beings have directly known all this as it really is, then they have escaped from this world. They have become detached from it, released from it, dwell with a mind rid of barriers. So this sutta is basically, the Buddha is saying, if there was no satisfaction with the body and the mind, then we will not become enslaved, delight in our body and our mind. But because there is gratification or satisfaction or enjoyment to be found with our body and our mind, so we become enslaved by it. But also, if there were no danger in the body and the mind, then we would not experience revulsion towards it. But because there is danger, so one day we wake up and we have revulsion towards the body and the mind. All of us in the world, we are like children. When we are young, we are greedy for all the nice things, ice cream, all the things that we can play with and enjoy in the world. But as we grow up slowly, then we find certain things, if we enjoy too much, it makes us sick. For example, we take too much ice cream, we become sick. And all that. We play too much, then we fail in our exam. So slowly we become wise, as they say, become streetwise. So similarly, in the world also, a lot of things we are not careful, we suffer if we are not careful. So slowly as we mature, then we understand the world. There is enjoyment in the world, but there is also suffering in the world. 22.33 at Savatthi, the Buddha said, monks, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness. And what is it, monks, that is not yours? Body is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness. Feeling is not yours, perception is not yours, volition, consciousness is not yours. Abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness. Suppose, monks, people were to carry off the grass, the sticks, the branches and foliage in this Jeta grove, or to burn them, or to do with them as they wish. Would you think people are carrying us off, or burning us, or doing with us as they wish? No, Venerable Sir. For what reason? Because, Venerable Sir, that is neither ourself nor what belongs to ourself. So too, monks, body is not yours. Feeling, perception, volition, consciousness is not yours. Abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness. So that's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha says, just like the grass, the branches, the sticks and foliage, it's not you, it's not yours. Similarly, this body and this mind is not you and it's not yours. How come? Because without your choosing it, this body came into the world. And after you were born, you have no control over it. It grows up by naturally. And then when you are young, you want to grow. You want the body to grow faster, so that you want to become an adult. But it won't listen to you. You grow slowly. And after you become an adult, and you start to become old. At that time you panic. Then you want the body to slow down. But you also have no control. Before you know it, suddenly, oh, you're 40 years old. Your eyes, you cannot read the newspaper anymore. You have to put on glasses. Very fast, isn't it? When you are 20 years old or 20-something, you still think you haven't grown up fully yet. Then when you are 30-something, you think, just mature. And before you know it, Lo Fang An has come already, and your eyes telling you that you are growing old already. So that's why life goes by so fast. Okay, 22.43, page 882, at Savatthi. This translation I don't like so much. It says, monks, dwell with yourselves as an island, with yourselves as a refuge, with no other refuge, with the Dhamma as an island, with the Dhamma as a refuge, with no other refuge. The old translation from the Pali Text Society, maybe because we are used to it, it sounds nicer to me. There it says, monks, be a lamp unto yourselves, be a refuge unto yourselves, with no other refuge. Take the Dhamma as your lamp, take the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge. When you dwell with yourself as a refuge, as a lamb, as a refuge, with no other refuge. With the Dhamma as your lamb, with the Dhamma as your refuge, no other refuge. The basis itself should be investigated thus. From what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair born? How are they produced? Let's stop here for a moment before I go further. You see this first opening sentence is very important. Be a lamb unto yourselves, or be an island unto yourselves. Be a refuge unto yourselves with no other refuge. That means the Buddha is saying, depend on yourself. Don't go and depend on some famous teacher and all that. Don't depend on any other person. Even if we live in the same room as an arahant, we cannot become enlightened if we don't depend on ourselves. Just like the simile, if you take a spoon to drink soup or to eat your meal, you enjoy the meal, you enjoy the soup. Does the spoon enjoy? The spoon doesn't know the taste of the soup or the food, right? So, in the same way, we have to practice the spiritual path, then only we will taste the fruit of the spiritual path. So that's why the Buddha says that we have to depend on ourselves. We don't depend on anybody else. But the Buddha at the same time says, take the Dhamma as your lamp, take the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge. So we only have to depend on two things. One is to depend on ourselves, and secondly to depend on the Buddha's Dhamma. Not some teacher's Dhamma, not some any other teacher, but the Buddha's Dhamma, the original Dhamma of a Sammasambuddha, which is found in the earliest Nikayas like this. So here the Buddha says you should investigate from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair born. How are they produced? In other words, where does suffering come from? And monks, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair born? How are they produced? Here monks, the unlearned ordinary person who does not see Aryans, is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma, who does not see superior persons and is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma. He regards the body as a self, or self as possessing body, or body as in the self, or self as in the body. That body of his changes and alters. Through the change and alteration of body, there arises in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair. Similarly, with feeling, perception, volition as consciousness. So here the Buddha says the origin of sorrow, lamentation, pain, despair and all that comes because a person, an ordinary person, does not associate with Aryans, does not know the Aryan Dhamma, does not train in the Aryan Dhamma. So because of that, he regards the five aggregates as the self, or as belonging to the self, or as being in the self, or the self as being in the five aggregates. But the five aggregates must change because it's the nature of everything in the world to change. So when the five aggregates change and he is too attached to the five aggregates, then when they change, he cannot accept it. So sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair arise. That is how suffering comes about. But monks, when one has understood the impermanence of body, its change, fading away and cessation, when one sees as it really is with correct wisdom thus, in the past and also now, all bodies are impermanent, suffering and subject to change. And sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair are abandoned. With their abandonment, one does not become agitated. Being unagitated, one dwells happily. A monk who dwells happily is said to be quenched in that respect. When one has understood, similarly, when one has understood the impermanence of feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, one sees as it really is, with correct wisdom, in the past and also now, all aggregates are impermanent, suffering and subject to change. So if he sees that, then he is not attached to it. Then sorrow, lamentation, pain and despair and all are abandoned. And with the abandonment, he does not become agitated. He dwells happily. It's the end of the sutta. So you see, sorrow and lamentation, all this suffering, is born from attachment to the five aggregates, which we take to be the self, or as belonging to the self. 22.47. Savati, monks, those ascetics and Brahmins who regard anything as self in various ways, or regard as self the five aggregates subject to clinging, or a certain one among them. But five, here monks, the unlearned ordinary person who does not see noble ones and is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma, who does not see superior persons and is unskilled and untrained in the Dhamma, regards body as self, or body as in the self, or self as in the body. He regards feeling, perception, volition and consciousness as self, or as belonging to self, or as being in the self, or the self as being in the aggregates. Thus in this way of regarding things, and the notion I am have not vanished in him. As I am has not vanished, there takes place a descent of the five faculties, of the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose, tongue, body faculty. There is monks, the mind, there are mental phenomena, there is the element of ignorance, and the unlearned ordinary person is contacted by feeling born of ignorance contact. I am occurs to him. I am this occurs to him. I will be and I will not be, and I will consist of body and I will be bodiless, and I will be percipient or I will be non-percipient, and I will be neither percipient nor non-percipient. These occur to him. The five faculties remain right there, monks, but in regard to them, the instructed or the learned noble disciple abandons ignorance and arouses true knowledge. With the fading away of ignorance and the rising of true knowledge, I am does not occur to him. I am this does not occur to him. I will be, I will not be, and I will consist of form or body, I will be formless, etc. All these do not occur in him. That's the end of the sutta. The important part about this sutta I want to mention here is this part where it says, thus this way of regarding things and the notion I am have not vanished in him. As I am has not vanished, there takes place a descent of the five faculties. I mentioned before, bhava gives rise, conditions birth, right? Bhava is this I am here. And this descent of the five faculties is the birth. So this sutta, in a way, proves that bhava means this perception we have that I exist, I am, because you feel that you exist, so you see yourself being born in the world, coming into the world. That is birth. I think I'll stop here for tonight. Most of these suttas are short. Later we'll come across some longer suttas on these five aggregates. Anything to discuss? That means seeing very clearly. You see, when we listen to these words of the Buddha, there is this five hindrances blocking us. So these five hindrances being sensual, desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. So because they hinder us, so when we listen to the sutta, we don't see it so clearly. We don't understand it so clearly. For example, the Buddha says, these aggregates are impermanent, and because they are impermanent, they give rise to suffering. That we can see. Then the Buddha says, since these aggregates are impermanent and give rise to suffering, then is it worthwhile to accept it as I and mine? It is not worthwhile. It is not fit to be regarded as I and mine. So when the Buddha says, when a noble disciple sees this clearly, then he is disenchanted with the five aggregates. He is dispassionate towards the five aggregates. Then he does not attach to them. And then he becomes liberated. Right? So the first part, for most people, you can understand that They are impermanent, so they are a source of suffering. But because you don't see clearly enough, you cannot let go. So it's only a person who can see very clearly that you hold on to it, only give you pain and suffering. So why should I hold on to it? Just let it go. One thing, this not seeing clearly, because we don't see clearly, we are deluded. Right? And this delusion is something very hard to see. A fool does not see himself as a fool. A wise man can see another person who can recognize a person who is a fool, but a fool cannot see himself as a fool. No, it applies to all beings. It is something that nature has implanted in all beings, so that you will struggle to survive. Oh yeah, all the Brahmas and Devas. Yeah. That's why in one of the suttas, I think in the Majjhima Nikaya, Magandhya Sutta, the Buddha said, we have been tricked by the mind. For a long time, we have been cheated by the mind. We keep believing the mind. The mind is a very cunning thing.
What are we? Body, okay, we know that this is not the mind. The mind, then we talk about the consciousness, the feeling, perceptions, and cognition.
Yes, you see, because for most people, this is all we know. Just like for most people in the world, the only happiness they know is through sensual pleasure. Eat, drink and be merry, that's all they know. So of course, naturally, they will want to enjoy this because they don't know of anything more superior. But when you know of something more superior, for example, you are given the chance to enjoy heavenly bliss. Then when you enjoy heavenly bliss, then earthly bliss you don't want already. So in the same way, we attach to this world of the external world of the five senses, and we take this body and the mind to be the self, because we know of no other self. So we have to go and meditate into our mind. When we go and meditate and we go deeper into our mind, slowly the body and these six consciousness start to fade away. Then when the six consciousness start, and the mind and the body and the six consciousness starts to fade away, the world starts to fade away, then only you realize, oh, this body and this mind that I took to be the self is not the self. It's just like when you are in the dream. When you are in the dream, you take that person in the dream to be yourself, and then you are running for your life because somebody wants to murder you, or you see a ghost or something, you're so scared. And then after that you wake up from the dream. And when you are woken up from the dream, then you tell yourself, oh, that was just a dream only. No reason for me to be scared now, that was just a dream. Now I've woken up. So in the same way, we have not woken up from samsara. So we take this body and the self to be mine now, because that's all we know. It's only when we meditate, the Buddha says, we go deeper, and then the world slowly melts away. Then we realize there is something else.
Yes, there's a true knowledge.
So the truth about life, reality, can only be achieved first through the theory part, the Dhamma that the Buddha teaches. The Dhamma teaches us how to practice, and then with the Dhamma as our guide, we make the effort. We make the effort, then we go into ourselves. When we go into ourselves, but you cannot go into yourself without the proper instructions. That's why all the instructions are given in the suttas, because it's not so simple. Just let go and meditate. No, there are so many conditions. You have to keep your sila. You got to fulfill your obligations before you go and practice. You do your family duties and all that. Then after you've done all your duties, then you do the duty to yourself. Because you want thing to help other people, but you have to help yourself. If you think you want to help everybody but you don't help yourself, you are also a fool. Even all the attachment, you've given up. No more totally, no more attachment, no more clinging. That one you can only understand when you go into your mind. It's not so simple, it can be explained by words. It can be explained by words, and the Buddha explained that everybody become enlightened already. Okay, and here.